Hello and welcome back. So in our previous segments we learned where the electrons live inside of an atom. Now what we're going to do is give energy to that atom. And so here are some different ways that it could happen. So the first is in a chemical reaction. So we saw an example of that where they took the sodium and they put it into the water and then it had this very violent chemical reaction. So this is when the electrons rearrange themselves or are given or are taken in a chemical reaction. The second one is what would happen if you take atoms and you strike them with electricity. And that's a picture of a glass tube that has a certain amount of gas in it, and then you're hitting it with electricity and you're causing it to glow. So we will be coming back to that one a little bit later. The next example is of solar cells. So where you have sunlight comes in and it strikes a certain kind of material, and then that gives energy to those atoms that make up that cell. Then the fourth example is heat. So when you give heat to atoms, at first they will start to vibrate if they're in the form of a solid. And then if those vibrations get too great, then the atoms will start to come apart. And then you have clumps of atoms, which we call a liquid. And then if you continue to heat it, then those atoms are going to come apart. So you have individual atoms. And then you've got a gas. And then you could continue to heat it, and then the electrons would start to come off the atoms, and then you've ionized it, and then we call that the fourth state of matter, which is plasma. Of course, there is a fifth state of matter, and that is the fifth element, but they made a movie out of that with Bruce Willis. So let's ignore that for the moment. I couldn't help myself. Now, what do atoms do with the energy that is given to them? So one thing that could happen is the electrons could begin to vibrate, they could begin to oscillate, and then when they do that, they give off radio waves. Another thing that could happen is that the atoms can start to move at different speeds through a material, and then that's going to give off infrared light, which we call heat. Another thing that could happen is the atom could start to spin, and that gives off infrared light. Another thing is atoms can start to vibrate. So an example of that might be water. So water is H2O, so it's got an oxygen, and then it's got these two hydrogens that are on like this. Now later, we'll talk about why is it bent like that. So for right now, we'll just say that that's water, H2O. And then what can happen is that those two H's can vibrate like that, or they can even vibrate like this and like this. So all of those vibrations produce infrared light. And then you can also have the electrons in the atom can jump up when they absorb energy, and then when they come back down, they emit energy. So that's the really important one that we want to talk about today. But next to it is going to be inside the nucleus. So in Unit 3, we're going to talk about nuclear stuff. And in particular, we had the atomic hotel, but the hotel has a basement. And in the basement is a nuclear hotel where the protons and neutrons live. And just like the electrons can jump from floor to floor when they have energy, so can the protons and neutrons in that nuclear hotel, which is in the basement of the atomic hotel. So the point is, do you notice that you've got radio waves, infrared, 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 visible, ultraviolet, X-rays, gamma rays? So notice that atoms can produce all of the different kinds of light that we see. So in our next segment, we want to talk about specifically what do the electrons do with the energy that is given to them, and how does that produce light. So I'll see you in the next segment.